The Holy Land, of 14,000 square miles, is small in size, but it has played a great role in human history. It is the land where lie the ruins of the world's most ancient civilizations. It is the land of prophets and Christ, who with their immortal teachings and divine laws directed the course of humanity towards justice, peace, and brotherly love by producing the three monotheistic faiths. From the grounds of this land spread the flames which established the rule of moral and religious beliefs between people blinded by error and idolatry. When you hear this sound, please change slides on the screen.
Jerusalem, standing amid the poor Judean hills, has been chosen by God to be the bulwark of monotheism. It is the sacred city of half of the human race, being the religious capital of the three monotheistic faiths. For the Jews, it is the symbol of their past glories and the hope of their future. For the Christians, it is the city of Jesus' last ministry, the city which saw Jesus die on the cross and rise from the dead. For the Muslims, it is the city where the prophet Muhammad is believed to have ascended into heaven. Jerusalem, source of faiths and spiritual laws, and the world's most sacred and loved city, has been also a city of terror, war, and blood. Although its name means peace, the sword has been devouring its children throughout its long history. There have been more wars fought at its gates than in any other city in the world.
The present impressive walls of Jerusalem are an agglomeration from different periods of construction. They were rebuilt in their final form as they appear today by the Turks under their great ruler Suleiman the Magnificent in 1542 A.D. In these walls, which are 2.5 miles in circumference and average 40 feet in height, there are 34 towers and 8 gates.
The Mount of Olives is located east of Jerusalem across the Kidron Valley. Its summit, which is 300 feet higher than Jerusalem, offers a magnificent view of the old city of Jerusalem and a striking panorama of the Judean hills, as far as the Dead Sea and the mountains of Moab on the east side. It is the mount where Christ ascended into heaven, foretold the destruction of Jerusalem, taught the Lord's Prayer, and came often for meditation and prayer.
The Acts tell how Jesus took his disciples to a mount called Olives, and how, after blessing them, he ascended to heaven. The top of the Mount of Olives is considered to be the site of the ascension. In the Acts, it is said that the disciples departed from the Mount of Olives, which was a Sabbath day's journey away from Jerusalem. This is the distance which approximately separates the site of the ascension from Jerusalem. The present small chapel is an edifice built by the Crusaders in the court of their church to contain the rock with the legendary footprint of Christ, made when he ascended to heaven.
The Church of the Paternoster is built on the traditional site, where Jesus taught his disciples the Lord's Prayer and foretold the terrible destruction of Jerusalem.
You see all these, do you not? Truly, I say to you, there will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down.
Here he revealed his last coming and the end of the world.
For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All this is but the beginning of the birth pangs.
Constantine built a church on the top of the Mount of Olives to commemorate the words of Jesus about the destruction of Jerusalem and his last coming. Constantine's church was destroyed in 614 by the Persians and rebuilt in the 12th century by the Crusaders. In 1868, Princess Aurelia de Bossy de la Tour d'Auvergne bought the site and donated it to France. In 1875, she built a convent for the order of the Carmelite nuns. Inside the church and on the walls of the cloister The Lord's Prayer is written in 62 languages.
The Garden of Gethsemane, which is one of the most important sights to see in the Holy Land, lies at the foot of the Mount of Olives. It appears today as it was 20 centuries ago. On the opposite hill, across the Kidron Valley, city followed city, but this garden is still kept almost as it was at the time of Jesus, with maybe the same olive trees. St. John spoke of it as a garden over the brook Kidron. It was a spot favored by Jesus. This garden, where Jesus on his last night underwent the most sorrowful hour of his passion, the hour in which he trembled in his human nature, choosing to suffer and die on the cross, taking upon himself the sins of all mankind. Father, if thou be willing, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but thine be done. Here then Judas came with the servants of the high priest and betrayed his master.
Now the betrayer had given them a sign, saying, "The one I shall kiss is the man. Seize him." And he came up to Jesus at once and said, "Hail, Master," and he kissed him. In the memorable Garden of Gethsemane, there are 8 olive trees whose age is lost in antiquity. Some botanists claim they may be 3,000 years old. Josephus tells that Titus cut down all trees in the environs of Jerusalem in 70 A.D. If these trees escape destruction, they are the very contemporaries of Christ, as they are Roman olive trees. If not, they are without doubt the shoots of those under which Jesus prayed that night of his agony. The olive tree does not die.
In 379, the Byzantines built the first basilica over the place made holy by the prayer and agony of Christ. This basilica was one of the first to be destroyed in 614 by the Persians. In the 12th century, the Crusaders rebuilt the church. The present church, which is one of Jerusalem's most beautiful churches, was built in 1919 to 1924. Since 16 nations contributed to its construction, it was named Church of All Nations.
The dim light, filtering through the bluish-purple windows, and the beauty of the interior, make a lovely atmosphere for prayer and meditation. The coat of arms of each contributing nation is to be seen in the cupolas and pictures. All the cupolas are decorated with beautiful mosaic. The windows are of translucent alabaster. The remaining part of the traditional rock of agony lies in front of the altar.
With its 7 striking onion-shaped spires, this is a fine example of old Moscow church style. It was built in 1888 by Tsar Alexander III in memory of his mother, and named after her, St. Mary Magdalene. It is maintained by the Russian nuns. In the crypt lies the body of the Grand Duchess Elizabeth Fedorovna, sister of the Empress Alexandria. She was killed in 1918 by the Bolshevists in Siberia, and according to her wish, her body was brought and buried here.
The Kidron Valley has been crossed by Jesus many times, either going to the temple through the Golden Gate or ascending to the Mount of Olives, where he used to spend the night mainly at Gethsemane or at Bethany in the house of his friend Lazarus. He surely crossed this valley on the memorable evening of Holy Thursday, when, leaving the cenacle, he went with his disciples to Gethsemane, and again after he was betrayed and led to the house of the high priest Caiaphas. According to the local tradition, the Kidron Valley will be the site of the last divine judgment. This belief has made the Kidron Valley a huge necropolis in which Jews, Muslims, and Christians alike choose to be buried.
In the year 700 B.C., Hezekiah, king of Jerusalem, in order to protect the water supply of his city from the invading Assyrians, cut in the rock a tunnel to channel the water of the Gihon spring located outside the walled city into the pool of Siloam, which was within the walls of the city. The outlet was closed and hidden from the eyes of the invaders. Jerusalem was saved, since the Assyrian army, brought low by thirst and pestilence, failed to conquer the city and withdrew. The tunnel, roughly shaped S, measures 600 yards. The workmen began at each end and accomplished a remarkable engineering feat to meet in the middle within 4 feet of each other.
This church, overlooking the Kidron Valley, was built in 1931 over the traditional site of the house of the high priest Caiaphas. Jesus, betrayed and arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane, was led to the house of the high priest. Here he spent the whole night, and here was the scene of his first trial. Here, St. Peter wept at the crowing of the cock in fulfillment of Christ's words. He denied his Lord 3 times before the cock crowed twice.
And Peter remembered the saying of Jesus, "Before the cock crows, ye will deny me 3 times." And he went out and wept bitterly. This is the place where Jesus ate with his disciples the Last Supper, establishing the communion service. And as they were eating, he took the bread, and blessed, and broke it, and gave it to them, and said, "Take, this is my body." And he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, and they all drank of it, and said to them, "This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many." In the same room, Jesus appeared twice to his disciples after his resurrection. In this same room, the disciples received the Holy Ghost. The first Christians had their headquarters on Mount Zion, and as early as the 1st century, a church was built here. This church evaded destruction in the year 70 A.D., and again in 135 A.D., since it was out of the military operations. It was enlarged by the Byzantines and called Holy Zion, to associate the first Christian church with the prophecy of Isaiah, "For out of Zion shall go forth the law, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem." It was probably from this shrine that the mount received its name. In 614, the Persians destroyed the Church of Holy Zion.
This is one of the most sacred Jewish sites in Israel, second only to the Western Wall. The tomb was described and located here by Rabbi Benjamin of Tudela when he visited Jerusalem in 1173. It is made of stone, covered with embroidered cloth, and carries the silver crown of the Torah.
When the Crusaders were driven out of Jerusalem, they left behind them 37 churches built or rebuilt during their time. St. Anne's Church, which is the best preserved, is one of the finest examples of their construction. It was built in 1100 A.D. by the wife of Baldwin I in the Romanesque style. It is built over a crypt venerated as the birthplace of Mary and the home of her parents, Joachim and Anne.
The Pool of Bethesda lies a few yards from St. Stephen's Gate and inside the walls of Jerusalem. At the time of Christ, it was just outside the northern wall of the city. It stood near the Sheep Gate, which led into the temple. It was a meeting place for invalids, as its water was believed to have healing properties. The pool is sacred to the Christians, since here Christ healed a man who had been crippled for 38 years. The pool, buried under debris for centuries, was recently in great part unearthed by the White Fathers.
He brought Jesus forth and sat down in the judgment seat in a place that is called the Pavement. This pavement, named Lithostratos in Greek, Gabata in Hebrew, was the scene of the public trial of Jesus. Here Pontius Pilate presented Jesus scourged and said, "Behold the man." Here he finally washed his hands and condemned Jesus to the death of the cross. This pavement, discovered only in 1931, is the actual courtyard of the Antonia, where Jesus was condemned to death and where he started the way of the cross. The stones trodden by the feet of Jesus are striated in order to prevent horses from slipping, and at intervals there are canals in the pavement to collect the rainwater into the large cistern beneath.
Traces of games played by the Roman soldiers are carved on the surface of some of the stones. One of the games, played with dice, the King's Game, could have been used with Jesus as its subject. They used to choose a burlesque king, mock him, and then put him to death. The pavement is one of the most interesting and emotional sights in the Holy Land.
Via Dolorosa is the traditional pathway Jesus followed carrying the cross. The events of this sorrowful way are commemorated by 14 stations, of which 9 are related in the Gospel and 5 in tradition. So they took Jesus, and he went out, bearing his own cross, to the place called the Place of a Skull, which is called in Hebrew, Golgotha. I am the mother of sorrows, and there is no one to console me. May your son's death grant life to those who wish and pray for it.
The Church of the Holy Sepulchre stands over Golgotha, the place of the crucifixion, and the tomb where the body of Jesus was laid. The crucifixion took place outside the city wall. Since its first construction in 324, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre has stood in almost the center of the walled city. 11 years after the crucifixion, Golgotha was included within the perimeter of the city by a new wall built by Herod Agrippa in the year 44 A.D. Hadrian, wanting to root out every remembrance of Jewish and Christian religions, obliterated Calvary and the tomb of Jesus by building a temple dedicated to Jupiter. Instead of desecrating the place, he preserved it. In 326 A.D., Constantine demolished Hadrian's temple and erected a magnificent basilica. The Constantine monument was destroyed in 614 by the Persians. Rebuilt on a reduced plan by Abbot Modestos, it was again destroyed by the Caliph Hakim in 1009. The destruction of the church by the Caliph sparked war and animosity for 200 years between East and West in the great collision of the Crusades. The present church was built by the Crusaders.
Calvary was a large rock rising about 45 feet out of the ground. Its name, the Place of the Skull, probably came from its appearance, which resembles a skull. And when the 6th hour had come, there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour. And at the 9th hour, Jesus cried with a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And Jesus uttered a loud cry and breathed his last.
Now there was in the place where he was crucified a garden, and in the garden a new sepulchre, wherein no body yet had been laid, Because of the preparation of the Passover, they laid Jesus, because the sepulchre was nigh at hand. Jesus was laid in a tomb at the foot of Calvary. This tomb, hewn out of the rock, was made by Joseph of Arimathea's family. The tomb of Joseph of Arimathea was the type of the rich Jewish tomb. It was composed of 2 chambers. The first served as the meeting place for the mourners. In the second one, on a couch cut in the rock, the corpse was laid. The present monument, with a Muscovite cupola, was built over the site in 1810 by the Greek Orthodox Church and the Russians.
The citadel was built by Herod the Great as a royal palace and as the western defense of Jerusalem. It was protected by walls and by 3 huge towers. This magnificent fortress palace was spared in the year 70 A.D. by Titus to be used as barracks for the 10th Roman Legion and as a witness to the heroism and might of the Roman soldiers. The massive Herodian blocks are still visible at the base. The citadel was restored by the Crusaders and by the Mamelukes in the 12th and 14th century. Most of the present structure dates from the time of Suleiman the Magnificent, who restored it in 1540. The citadel is also known as the Tower of David, as it is said that Herod built his palace on the site of an earlier fortress built by King David.
The Golden Gate is a 7th century Byzantine structure. It stands over the original site of the Gate of Mercy of the Second Temple. Part of the side wall belongs to the primitive structure. It was through this gate that Jesus entered the city after his triumphal entry on Palm Sunday. Christians also attach to this gate the memory of the Beautiful Gate, where St. Peter healed the lame.
I have no silver and gold. I give you what I have in the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth. Walk.
The gate was completely walled up in 1530 by the Turks.
St. Stephen's Gate stands probably on the site of the ancient Sheep Gate. Christians named this gate after St. Stephen, who was traditionally martyred nearby. It is also named the Lion's Gate, after the 2 lions carved in relief on both sides of the entrance. The Arabs call it the Gate of Our Lady, because the road through it leads to the tomb of the Virgin Mary in the Kidron Valley.
This is called Damascus Gate, since it stands at the beginning of an ancient road leading to Damascus. Since the 7th century, the Arabs have called it Bab el-Amud, Gate of the Column, because of a column raised there on an ancient Roman street built by Hadrian in 135 A.D. The gate in its present structure was built in 1537 A.D. by the Turks. It is the busiest and the most ornate gate.
The site north of the Damascus Gate is believed by many to be the place of the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus Christ. In 1883, the British General Charles Gordon noted this rocky hill which resembled a human skull and suggested that this might be the true Calvary. The presence of a nearby rock-hewn tomb, believed to be 1st century, helped to strengthen this idea, and the scriptural significance of the site appealed to many eminent Christians of that day. An association was formed, and by 1892 sufficient money was collected to purchase the tomb and its surroundings and have it cared for by a resident warden. The garden tomb gives a clear picture of what the place of crucifixion and burial of Christ must have looked like at the time of Jesus. The simplicity and beauty of the site and the peaceful atmosphere of the garden tomb make it a favorable spot for prayer and meditation.
The nearby Hill of Calvary, which resembles a skull.
This small museum, an onion-top-shaped building, is designed to resemble the lids of the jars in which the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered. The Essene community considered themselves as the sons of light, and the rest of the world as the sons of darkness. This concept is expressed by the contrast between the whiteness of the shrine and the blackness of the wall over the entrance. The basalt black wall is also supposed to recall the heavy burden which lay on Israel for 2,000 years.
The shrine, symbolizing a cave, is a subterranean building with a tunnel-shaped interior. It houses the famous Dead Sea Scrolls. Scrolls found at Masada, the Bar Kokhba letters, and objects associated with the site of discovery. Its interior induces the feeling of being in a cave. The scroll of Isaiah, 24 feet long, is displayed upon a platform, which, as seen in this slide, resembles a jar-shaped fountain.
This is a $7 million building constructed with the red stones of Jerusalem. It was established with funds from the family of James de Rothschild in England and was inaugurated in 1966. It contains all kinds of facilities, including an excellent library of over 50,000 volumes. The reception hall is decorated with a 24-foot-high Chagall tapestry. The Israeli parliament is composed of 120 members elected by a general vote of all citizens over the age of 18. The elections take place every 4 years.
The temple compound, covering an area of 35 acres, is a sixth of the area of the old city of Jerusalem. According to tradition, this area is the old Mount Moriah, where Abraham prepared the sacrifice of his son Isaac. Solomon made the mountain holy by building the temple on its summit and by bringing into it the Ark of the Covenant. The Temple of Solomon was burned to the ground by Nebuchadnezzar in 587 B.C. After the return from captivity in 536, the temple was rebuilt on a reduced plan by Zerubbabel. In the year 20 B.C., Herod the Great rebuilt the temple on a large scale and with all its primitive splendors. Herod's temple was completely destroyed in the year 70 A.D. by Titus. The area was then turned into a heap of rubbish, and as such it remained till the conquest of Jerusalem by the Arabs in the 7th century. The Muslim belief that the Prophet Muhammad ascended into heaven from the historic Rock of Moriah gave birth to one of the most important and most beautiful mosques of the Islamic world.
Known also as the Mosque of Omar, it was built at the end of the 7th century by the Umayyad Caliph Abdul Malik bin Marwan. He built a splendid mosque, spending on its construction all the taxes of his province Egypt for 7 years. The mosque, which ranks in sanctity after that of the Kaaba and the tomb of the Prophet in Medina, is the oldest and the most exquisite Muslim shrine in the world. The exterior is a rectangular octagon. The dome, made of special aluminium bronze alloy, shines like gold under the brilliant sun of Jerusalem.
The historical rock of Mount Moriah lies under the dome of the magnificent building of the Dome of the Rock. It is 15 yards long, 12 yards wide, and rises to a height of 2 yards above the ground. This is the traditional rock where Abraham prepared the sacrifice of his son Isaac. Muslims believe that from this same rock, the Prophet Muhammad ascended in a night journey into heaven.
Although the mosque was designed and built by Byzantine artists, all its decorations are Oriental. The interior of the building, with a beautifully decorated cupola, the richly colored stained glass windows, and the lovely mosaic of the walls, offer an inimitable variety of colors and an enchanting atmosphere of worship.
This slide shows the naked and irregular surface of the Rock of Moriah, the arcades, and the cupola, which is of woodwork beautifully decorated with designs of rounded figures.
Al-Aqsa, the distant mosque, stands at the southern part of the esplanade and was built between 709 and 715 by the Caliph Walid, son of Abd al-Malik, who built the Dome of the Rock. Very little of the original of Al-Aqsa remains in the present structure, since it has been destroyed and renovated many times. Al-Aqsa Mosque is used for group prayers and can hold 5,000 worshippers, while the Dome of the Rock is used for individual worship.
This is the holiest shrine of the Jewish world. It is revered as the last relic of the last temple. The western wall is a portion of the wall that Herod built around the second temple in 20 B.C. Titus, in the year 70 A.D., spared this part of the wall with its huge blocks to show the future generations the greatness of the Roman soldiers who had been able to destroy the rest of the building. During the Roman period, Jews were not allowed to come to Jerusalem. However, during the Byzantine period, they were allowed to come once a year, on the anniversary of the destruction of the temple, to lament the dispersion of their people and to weep over the ruins of the Holy Temple, which is why this section of the wall became known as the Wailing Wall.
The custom of praying at the wall continued for centuries. From 1948 to 1967, Jews were not allowed to visit the wall since it was in the Jordanian sector of the city. After the Six-Day War, the Wailing Wall became a place for national rejoicing as well as a place of worship. A large esplanade was cleared to accommodate thousands of worshippers.
This slide shows part of a model of the city of Jerusalem of Herod's time. Its construction took 7 years of research, study, and careful building. The scale is 1 to 50, and it occupies 1/4 acre. The topography is an exact copy of Jerusalem during the time of Christ.
Bethlehem, with a population of about 30,000 inhabitants, stands 5 miles south of Jerusalem on a rocky hill 2,600 feet above sea level. Bethlehem's roots go back to the very remote times of the patriarchs. It was mentioned in the Bible in connection with the death of Rachel. Thus Rachel died, and she was buried on the road to Ephrata, which is Bethlehem. In Bethlehem, Ruth met Boaz and married him. In Bethlehem, David was born and anointed king of Israel by the prophet Samuel. But you, Bethlehem Ephrata, the least of the clans of Judah, out of you will be born for me the one who is to rule over Israel.
In those days, a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be enrolled, and all went to be enrolled, each to his own city. And Joseph also went up from Galilee, from the city of Nazareth, to Judea, to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, to be enrolled with Mary, his betrothed, who was with child. And while they were there, the time came for her to deliver, and she gave birth to her firstborn son.
The birth of Jesus in Bethlehem rendered this little town immortal, won it a deathless renown, and made its name live in the heart of Christianity for 2,000 years.
In the year 135, Hadrian desecrated the Cave of Nativity, surrounding it by a temple dedicated to Adonis. This desecration of the cave served to fix the site indelibly for the future. Constantine, removing the Hadrian temple in the beginning of the 4th century, found the cave intact. Constantine then built a magnificent basilica, very richly decorated with marble mosaics and frescoes. In 529, the church was badly damaged by the Samaritans, who revolted against the Byzantine Empire. It was immediately rebuilt by Justinian. The Justinian church is the one still standing that we see today. In 614, when the Persians destroyed all churches and convents, the Church of the Nativity was the only church which evaded destruction. A mosaic scene of the Nativity, representing the wise men in ancient Persian costume, deterred them from their vandalistic purpose. The Church of the Nativity is the oldest church in the Holy Land, and probably the oldest in the world.
The basilica has the shape of a cross, 170 feet long and 80 feet wide. It is divided into 5 aisles by 4 rows of columns, which are of red stone of the country. Fragments of mosaics from the 4th century church were discovered in 1936. They are covered with a wooden floor. The beautiful Greek Orthodox choir, standing above the cave of the Nativity, is all of hand-carved wood from cedars of Lebanon.
Two entrances lead down to the cave, which has a rectangular shape, 35 feet by 10 feet. A silver star with Latin inscription, "Here Christ was born," marks the spot where Christ was born. The original roof of the cave has been replaced by one in masonry since the 4th century. The walls of the grotto are covered with asbestos, guaranteed against fire, donated in 1874 by MacMahon, President of the French Republic. It depicts facts of the childhood of Jesus.
The manger, which lies to the right of the spot where Jesus was born, was probably used for storing fodder. It was the best and driest spot to place the baby, rather than placing him on the hard ground. She wrapped him in swaddling clothes and laid him in a manger. The primitive rock of the cave, blackened by the smoke of candles and oil lamps, may be seen above the site of the holy manger.
And there was in the same country shepherds watching and keeping the night watches over their flocks. And behold, an angel of the Lord stood by them, and the brightness of God shone round about them. Fear not, for behold, I bring you good tidings of great joy. For this day is born to you a Saviour, who is Christ the Lord. Although the Gospel words do not localize the exact place where the shepherds were, the ancient tradition has fixed it in a field about 3 miles east of Bethlehem.
The old women of Bethlehem still wear the old traditional costume. A long black robe, a belt around the waist, and a white veil flowing down to the shoulders. On a red cone is attached a string of coins set firmly on the head. This type of dress was brought here by the Crusaders.
Rachel died and was buried on the way to Ephrata, that is, Bethlehem. Jacob erected a memorial over her grave, and this memorial marks Rachel's grave to this day. The small, domed monument over the tomb is from the 15th century. The tomb is sacred to Jews, Muslims, and Christians. Women of the area visit the tomb and often pray for successful childbirth.
With its conical summit resembling a volcano, the Herodian stands in the wilderness of Judea, 5 miles southeast of Bethlehem. It is named after King Herod the Great, who built on its top a magnificent fortified palace. At its foot, were palaces, terraced gardens and pools, and 200 steps of the purest white marble led to the citadel on the top. After his death, Herod was buried here in a bier which was of solid gold, studded with precious stones, and had a covering of purple embroidered with various colors.
After his separation from his nephew Lot, Abraham came to Mamre and built an altar for God. Here he received the 3 angels who announced to him that his wife Sarah would have a son. From here, Abraham went to rescue Lot. Here Abraham pleaded for Sodom and Gomorrah. Here David was anointed king. From the 7th century, the site of Mamre was forgotten, and many places claimed the honor of being the true Mamre. In 1926, a German society excavated Haram Ramat el Khalil and found remains of the different buildings which had successively been built at Mamre: Herod's, Hadrian, Byzantine, and Arab. Thus, this place became the accepted site of Mamre.
Hebron is one of the oldest cities of Palestine. According to the Bible, it was founded in the 17th century B.C. According to Dr. Hammond, Hebron is the oldest continuously occupied unwalled city in the world. Abraham came to Hebron, and here he bought the cave of Machpelah, which became the family burial place. Sarah, Abraham, Isaac, Rebekah, Jacob, and Leah are buried in Hebron. Hebron is one of the Muslims' sacred cities because of the tomb of Abraham and his sons, who are revered by them as prophets, and it is one of the 4 sacred cities of the Jews. David was elected king here, and Hebron was his capital for the first 7 years of his rule.
Herod the Great, builder of the temple in Jerusalem, was the first to build a magnificent temple over the cave of Machpelah in Hebron. The foundations he laid with large stones are still standing. Some of these stones are more than 20 feet long. This monument, which began as a Jewish temple, was converted in the 4th century into a church by the Byzantines, into a mosque by the Muslims in the 7th century, into a church by the Crusaders, and again into a mosque by Saladin.
And now, please turn over the cassette. The present structure of the mosque, which stands over the cave of Machpelah, is mainly Crusader. In the mosque there are 6 cenotaphs, which are said to stand directly above the graves of the patriarchs and their wives buried in the cave. The Muslims never descended into the cave, which is considered to be too sacred to walk in. The cenotaphs of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are covered with green and gold cloths, and those of Sarah, Rebekah, and Leah with crimson cloths.
This slide shows the tombs of Isaac and Rebekah, which are located in the middle of the mosque, and the mihrab, which is the niche towards which the Muslims turn in prayer. The pulpit to the right is a fine cedar wood carving, and is believed to have been installed by Saladin in the 12th century.
Hebron is famous for its industry of pottery and hand-blown glass, known as Hebron glass. Pottery and glass are made in the same way as in the very remote times. I went down to the potter's house, and there he was working at his wheel. The potter makes the required shape by skillfully touching the moist clay spinning round on the wheel.
Apart from its pottery, Hebron has also been famous for many centuries for its industry of glass blown as in ancient times. A long rod is thrust into the molten glass in the furnace, and with swift movements, and then by blowing gently, as seen in this slide, all kinds of bottles, vases, cups, and beads of different colors are made.
About 2.5 miles from the western shore of the Dead Sea, in the wilderness of Judea, stands the rock fortress of Masada. Masada has become a shrine for the Jews, since it has been the site of one of the most dramatic episodes of Jewish history. It is the symbol of courage and heroism, the symbol of choice of death over slavery. In 40 B.C., Herod the Great built a huge, magnificent fortress at the top of Masada. After the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 A.D., a band of Jewish patriots, led by Eliezer ben Yair, marched on Masada and captured it from a Roman garrison. Joined later by a few surviving patriots who evaded capture in Jerusalem, they determined to continue the fight for freedom and made Masada a base for guerrilla strikes against the Romans. In 72 A.D., Silva, a general of Titus, marched on that great rock of Masada, and after a long besiege of many months and hard fighting, a break was made in the wall. The leader, Ben Yair, knowing that it was the beginning of the end, gathered his men and delivered one of the most dramatic speeches in history, urging them to die by their own hands rather than fall into the hands of their enemies. They then chose 10 men by lot to slay all the rest. The Romans entered the fortress, saw the bodies, and heard the story from the 2 women who, with 5 small children, had hidden themselves. Far from exulting in the triumph of joy that might have been expected from enemies, they united to admire the steady virtue and dignity of mind with which the Jews had been inspired, and wondered at the contempt of death by which such numbers had been bound in one solemn compact. For the Romans, it was a hollow victory.
General Silva, resolving to crush this outburst of resistance, marched on Masada with his best soldiers, the 10th Legion, and prepared himself for a long siege. He built a wall 3 miles in circumference all round the fortress. At strategic points around the base, he established 8 military camps. The blockade was complete, none of the besieged could escape, and they were cut off from the rest of the country. This slide shows the rock of Masada with the remains of the Roman camps which had been established all around its base.
The top of Masada, 1/2 mile long, 220 yards wide, was excavated in 1963 to 1965 by Professor Yigal Yadin and volunteers from many different countries. These storehouses, shown in this slide, are part of many important and interesting remains discovered in the fortress, which was strongly fortified and very expensively built. The Rock of Masada, standing majestically in the desert, is still a glorious witness to the courage and dignity of those who preferred to die free rather than to live in slavery. It is one of the most interesting and emotional sights to be seen in Israel.
Bethany is 2 miles east of Jerusalem on the eastern slope of the Mount of Olives. Since the 4th century, it carries the name of Lazarus, El Azariah, since it was the home of Lazarus and his 2 sisters, Mary and Martha, whom Jesus loved. And Jesus often visited Bethany. Here he taught the better way of life, when he said to Martha, "Martha, Martha, you are anxious about too many things. Only one is necessary. Mary has chosen the better part, which shall not be taken from her." Here Christ performed the great miracle of raising Lazarus from the dead. Here in the house of Simon the leper, Mary anointed Jesus with very precious perfume.
It was a cave, and a stone lay upon it. It seems that the tomb of Lazarus was hewn in the rock within a cave. No wonder Jesus cried with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. 22 steps lead down to a dark cave which is the traditional tomb of Lazarus. The original entrance, which must have been at ground level, was sealed by the Muslims, who built a mosque between the church and the tomb.
Jericho lies 820 feet below sea level in the Jordan Valley, which is a great rift in the earth's crust, extending from Mount Hermon in the north to the Gulf of Aqaba in the south, a distance of 280 miles. Since very remote times, Jericho has been well known for the richness of its well-watered soil and its oranges, bananas, and dates. It was called the City of Palms. While in summertime, Jericho is very hot and airless, in winter and spring, it has a wonderful climate, and the air is pervaded with the odors of many different kinds of flowers. Jericho, with its rich soil, has been the cradle of human civilization as far back as 7,000 to 10,000 B.C. It is considered the oldest city in the world to have been discovered so far.
Dr. Sellon was the first to start digging the site of Old Jericho in 1908. In 1926 to 36, Garstang of the British School of Archaeology excavated for 6 campaigns, continuing the work begun by Dr. Sellon. This was continued by Miss Kathleen Kenyon in 1952. The result of the final excavations was the discovery of the earliest stratified levels ever found in any part of the world. Objects found were examined by the carbon-14 method and dated to 7000 B.C. On the bedrock, a very interesting Neolithic tower was discovered. It is built of stones and mud with a pierced center from top to bottom, in which are 22 well-built steps.
The temptation of Jesus was immediately after his baptism in the Jordan River. And Jesus, being full of the Holy Ghost, returned from Jordan and was led by the Spirit into the wilderness. Neither the Gospel or any other source enable us to determine exactly the spot where Jesus underwent his 40 days of fasting. Later tradition indicated the Mount of Karantal, which rises up behind the old Jericho as the site of the first and third temptations. The summit of the mountain, which commands a magnificent view of the Jordan Valley and the land of Moab, is indicated as the site of the last temptation, where the devil showed him all the kingdoms of the world.
The River Jordan is a strange stream which flows down from the perpetual snow-capped heights of Mount Hermon to the depths of the Dead Sea. It twists and curves in a 160-mile-long bend, while the distance it covers is only 65 miles in a straight line. Its average width is 100 feet. The Jordan is a holy river. John, an austere-looking figure clothed with camel's hair, eating locusts and honey, was preaching and baptizing along the lower reaches of the Jordan. Jesus came from Galilee and was baptized in the River Jordan by St. John.
And when Jesus was baptized, he went up immediately from the water. And behold, the heavens were opened, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove, and alighting on him. And a voice from heaven saying, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased."
The traditional spot where Jesus was baptized is located 5 miles east of Jericho. Somewhere near the site of the baptism, the Israelites under Joshua crossed the river and invaded the land.
The Dead Sea is 47 miles long by 10 miles wide. It has a surface area of 360 square miles, and its water attains a maximum depth of 1,278 feet. It lies 1,290 feet below sea level which is the lowest spot on the Earth's surface. It is called the Dead Sea because of the absence of any animal life in its water, which is the most salt-saturated water in the world, containing about 27% solids. The reason why the Dead Sea is a huge concentration of chemicals is because it has no outlet. Every day, the Jordan and other streams pour out nearly 7 million tons of water mixed with sulfurous and nitrous matter. This water, unable to escape and subject to the tremendous heat of the Jordan Valley, evaporates, leaving behind a large deposit of solid and other chemicals in the sea.
Qumran, lying at the northwest shore of the Dead Sea, was the home of the community of the Essenes, the writers of the famous Dead Sea Scrolls. The site was found and completely excavated in 1951 to 56. The ruins comprised a main building, 120 feet long by 90 feet wide, and was constructed with large stones, roughly dressed and coated with plaster. On the north side stands a defensive tower. A dining room with an adjoining kitchen containing over 1,000 ceramic bowls was found. The compound around the main building comprised a dyer shop, stable, pottery, workshop, a mill, and 7 cisterns. The most interesting find was the scriptorium with the benches, the writing table, and 2 inkstands, with one containing dried ink.
This cave is about 100 yards from the ruins of Qumran, and it is the only cave which can be easily visited, since the other caves are in the rock face of the mountain and are not easy to reach. Cave number 4, discovered in 1952 by the Bedouins, produced the largest quantity of manuscript material. Most manuscripts were hidden in this cave, as it was the nearest to the settlement.
Seven cisterns were found in Qumran. These cisterns were filled with rainwater channeled from the nearby cliffs by an aqueduct, the remains of which may be seen to the west. This slide shows a cistern dated to the 8th century BC. The crack in the steps is probably the result of a devastating earthquake in 31 BC, after which the settlement was destroyed and abandoned.
In 1949, Professor Harding, Director of Antiquities in Jordan, Père de Vaux, Director of the École Biblique in Jerusalem, with the Bedouins, encouraged by the financial rewards of the scroll business, started researches all over the western region of the Dead Sea. More than 30 caves have been excavated and thousands of fragments were found. The Dead Sea Scrolls were written in ancient Hebrew on leather and papyrus, with the exception of 2 scrolls which were written on copper.
Jacob, on his return from Mesopotamia, came to the beautiful valley lying between the 2 mountains, Gerizim and Ebal, as did Abraham before him. He bought a piece of land on which he pitched his tent and dug a well for himself, his children, and his flocks. Since that time, the well has been known as Jacob's Well. It was at the same well that Christ met the Samaritan woman and asked her for water to drink. If you knew the gift of God and who it is that is saying to you, "Give me a drink," you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water. St. John mentioned that the sublime dialogue took place at Jacob's Well. The old Jewish and Christian traditions, with the uninterrupted series of witnesses, affirm that this is the authentic well dug by Jacob and at which Christ talked to the Samaritan woman. The well is 7.5 feet in diameter, 90 feet deep, and contains soft water.
Numbering 400 people, 240 in Nablus and 160 in Holon, the Samaritans are the strangest and most ancient sect in the world. Remnants of a once powerful race, the Samaritans have remained pure in blood for 2,500 years. The separation between the Samaritans and the Jews began after the return from the Babylonian captivity. The Jews refused to consider the inhabitants of Samaria, who escaped deportation, as Jews because they had mingled with the colonist Assyrians. They also refused to allow them to share in the rebuilding of the temple. The Samaritans, with implacable hatred, separated themselves from the Jews and built a rival temple on Mount Gerizim. From the Bible, they only recognize the 5 books of Moses, and their most precious possession is an ancient copy of the Pentateuch written on parchment. They claim that their Pentateuch is the oldest handwritten book in the world, and that it was written by Aaron, Moses' brother, 3,600 years ago. Scholars date their book to the 12th century A.D. Many of these Samaritans are poor, and some are mentally sick, as they only marry within their own group.
The valley of Jezreel stretches between the mountains of Galilee in the north and the mountains of Samaria in the south. It is the largest valley in Israel. It has the shape of a triangle, 15 by 15 by 20 miles. It was famous in ancient times as it is today for its fertility. It is known as the breadbasket of Israel. The strategic position and the fertility of this plain made it one of the most famous battlefields of the ancient world. More than 20 battles have been fought for its control. Hebrews, Canaanites, Midianites, Syrians, Egyptians, Assyrians, Babylonians, Greeks, Romans, Arabs, Crusaders, Turks, and last the British under Allenby during the First World War fought on its soil.
Armageddon, located on the southern edge of the plain of Jezreel, was a strategic center in biblical and earlier ages. Its position, commanding the great highway which connected the land of Egypt in the south with Mesopotamia and Syria in the north, was of great strategic value throughout history. The numerous battles fought at Megiddo made it a symbol of war. Christian belief envisions that the last and final great battle of the world shall be fought at Megiddo. And he gathered them together in a place called in the Hebrew tongue Armageddon. Megiddo was excavated between 1926 and 1936 by the Oriental Institute of the University of Chicago. Excavations covering an area of 13 acres revealed the remains of 20 superimposed cities. Each city was represented by a distinct layer of ruins. The earliest dated to about 4000 BC, and the latest built on 70 feet of high rubble to about 400 BC.
The most amazing and interesting find in Megiddo was the discovery of an ingenious water system, which is one of the most remarkable examples of the skilled engineering of ancient times. A large shaft was sunk to the ground. From the bottom of the shaft, a tunnel was cut through the rocks, channeling the water into the city from a spring outside the city. The spring opening was covered with earth to hide it from the besieging forces. The tunnel is still well preserved after... In the 6th month, the angel Gabriel was sent from God to a city of Galilee named Nazareth, to a virgin betrothed to a man whose name was Joseph. And the virgin's name was Mary. And he came to her and said, "Hail, O favored one, the Lord is with you. For you have found favor with God. And behold, you will conceive in your womb and bear a son, and you shall call his name Jesus."
Nazareth, enshrined amidst hills, is one of the main Christian cities. It was the place chosen by God for the annunciation of the birth of his Son. Here the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. Here Jesus grew to manhood. Here he spent his hidden 30 years playing in the streets and on the hills with nothing to distinguish him from the other children. When Jesus began his ministry, he was not understood in Nazareth. Amen, I say to you, But no prophet is accepted in his own country. The first attempt on Jesus' life was made in Nazareth. Jesus then left Nazareth, went down to Capernaum, and made it his city.
This large, magnificent church, built in 1960 to 1968 over the Grotto of the Annunciation, is one of the largest Christian sanctuaries in the Middle East. It was designed by the Italian architect Signor Muzio, who achieved a great architectural success. He built two interconnected churches, one above the other, preserving in full the remains of ancient churches. The two churches are 80 feet high and 130 feet long. The western and southern facades are decorated with statues illustrating the Incarnation and the Annunciation.
Mary's Well is one of the authentic sites of the Holy Land. It was and still is the city's only water supply. There is no doubt that Jesus with his mother came here to draw water, as come today the women and children of Nazareth. The stream gushes out of the mountain and runs through a conduit to a public fountain. The Greek Orthodox claim that the Annunciation took place while the Virgin Mary was drawing water from the fountain, and they built their church over it.
There are 3 or 4 places of that name which claim to be Cana of the New Testament. Cana, which lies 4 miles along the road from Nazareth to Tiberias, is the most favored one. Cana is known throughout the whole Christian world, as it was the scene of the first miracle of Jesus, when he changed water into wine at the wedding feast. The 2 small churches, one belonging to the Greek Orthodox and a second to the Franciscan Fathers, are built on the traditional site of the wedding ceremony to commemorate the first miracle of Jesus.
Tiberias lies 682 feet below sea level on the west side of the Sea of Galilee. In 62 AD, Herod Antipas built this city with beautiful palaces, theaters, temples, shining with gold and marble, public baths over the hot springs famed throughout the Roman world for their healing properties, and named it Tiberias, in honor of the Roman Emperor Tiberius. After the Bar Kokhba revolt and the expulsion of the Jews from Jerusalem, Tiberias replaced Jerusalem and became the dwelling place of the great sages and the religious and intellectual Jewish center. Many famous rabbis are buried in Tiberias, which is considered as one of the 4 sacred Jewish cities. It is the most popular winter resort in Israel.
The Sea of Galilee is 13 miles long, 7 miles wide, between 130 and 157 feet deep, and lies at 686 feet below sea level. The water is pure and is generally calm, but sometimes sudden and dangerous storms turning into a raging sea with high waves. At the time of Jesus, Galilee was the main artery of roads crossing in all directions. The good communications, the extreme fertility of the valley, the beauty of the landscape drew a considerable population. The Sea of Galilee, as a central feature, was surrounded by 9 cities, each of not less than 15,000 inhabitants. It was on the slopes of this beautiful lake, described as the ambition of nature, that Jesus began to preach the kingdom of God. Here Jesus passed most of his public life, gave most of his teachings, and worked most of his miracles. On the seashore, Jesus called Peter, Andrew, James, and other apostles. Here, Jesus healed a leper. Here, Jesus spoke to the multitude from Peter's boat. Here, Jesus commanded the violent storm to be still. Jesus walked on a stormy water. The 12 apostles were ordained on a mountain near the sea.
At present, the calm, blue surface of the water is disturbed by sailing boats. At the time of Jesus, the Sea of Galilee and the valleys surrounding it were a scene of continuous activity. George Adams Smith describes the sea and its surroundings. Where there are now no trees, there were great woods. Where there are marshes, there were noble gardens. Where there is but one boat, there were fleets of sails.
The Sea of Galilee and the plain of the Gennesaret around its shores offer one of the most beautiful landscapes in Israel. At the time of Jesus, Josephus described this landscape as the ambition of nature. Father Eugene Hode describes the lake. I believe that there are more beautiful lakes in the world set in a more enchanting surrounding, but I still believe that there is not in the world a more fascinating lake. Look at its azure blue in deep sleep without a ripple on its bosom. The little sailing boats, as if just painted on the canvas. Not a breath of air to disturb in its waters the great reflections of the surrounding mountains. It is a joy that leads one to hourless contemplation.
Capernaum is located 2.5 miles from where the Jordan enters the Sea of Galilee. At the time of Jesus, it was probably the largest and richest city along the shores of the sea, with a customs station and a residence for a high Roman officer. Jesus left Nazareth, went down to Capernaum, and made it the center of his activities for about 20 months. Here he manifested his goodness and his omnipotence by most of his miracles. Capernaum was the home of St. Peter. Here Jesus taught in the synagogue. Here Jesus healed a leper, delivered a man of an unclean spirit, healed Peter's mother-in-law and the centurion's servant. Jesus healed the palsied man when he was let down through the roof. Jesus raised Jairus' daughter from the dead. Jesus healed the woman who had an issue of blood. Jesus healed 2 blind men. Jesus healed the withered hand. Jesus pronounced a curse upon the city. And though thou, Capernaum, which art exalted unto heaven, shall be brought down to hell. For if the mighty works which have been done in thee had been done in Sodom, it would have remained until this day. But I say to you, that it shall be more tolerable for the land of Sodom in the day of judgment than for thee.
Professor Albright, dating the Capernaum synagogue to 244 A.D., is certain that it stands over the site of an earlier one, which was, with all probability, built by the Roman centurion whose servant was healed by Jesus at the request of the Jews. This man is worthy, for he loved our nation and hath built us a synagogue. Many stones of the first synagogue built by the Roman centurion were incorporated in the second one. This is the reason that some stones are decorated with carvings representing Jewish and Roman symbols. Among the Jewish symbols are the menorah, the shofar, the ram's horn, the Star of David, the palm tree, which is the old symbol of the land, and the Ark of the Covenant, seen in this slide. Christians venerate the site as some of these still standing stones once echoed with the voice of Jesus, worshipping, teaching, and making miracles in the first synagogue.
This modern little chapel of primacy was built in 1934 over a massive rock known since the medieval ages as Mensa Christi, the Table of the Lord. It is the traditional site where the risen Lord appeared to his disciples, prepared breakfast for them, and gave Peter the pastoral commission of "Feed my sheep."
The word Topka derives from the Greek word heptapagon, meaning 7 springs. It is a place with a plentiful supply of water. The tradition localizes here the site where Jesus fed 5,000 with 5 loaves and 2 fishes. And they all ate and were satisfied, and they took up 12 baskets full of pieces and of the fish. And those who ate the loaves were 5,000 men. 2 Byzantine churches were built on this site, made holy by the miracle of Jesus. In 1932, remains of these 2 churches were discovered with the most striking and best preserved mosaics. The floor is a magnificent mosaic picture of birds, fishes, beasts, and flowers of the lake region. Beneath the altar, there is a mosaic of a basket of loaves flanked by fish, as seen in this slide.
The Mount of Beatitudes is the site where Jesus uttered the immortal words of the Beatitudes and the most wonderful principles of the blessed life. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven.
Blessed are the weak, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven.
This church, commanding a superb view of the lake, was built in 1937 by the Franciscans.
Magdala is located 4 miles north of Tiberias. Today it is a small village of fishermen. At the time of Christ, it was a city of considerable importance. According to Josephus, it had 4,000 inhabitants and a fleet of 230 boats. Magdala became famous because it is the birthplace of Mary Magdalene, the woman Jesus healed from evil spirits and infirmities. Mary Magdalene then became one of the most devoted and faithful followers of Christ. She followed him to his death on Calvary. She was the first to come to the tomb on the day of his resurrection and the first to see the risen Lord.
Mount Tabor, in apparent isolation without foothills, rises abruptly 1,600 feet above the surrounding plains and 1,900 feet above sea level. It is the most picturesque and striking mountain in the Galilee. To the psalmist, its strength and beauty are a testimony to the Creator. In Psalm 89, David sings that Tabor and Hermon shall rejoice in the name of the Lord. Its beauty was mentioned many times in the Bible. It was considered as a holy mountain for Israel, as it was a witness to the glory of God, manifested in the important victory of Barak, advised and led by the prophetess Deborah over the strong Canaanite army of Sisera. For the Christians, Mount Tabor is a holy mount, as it was chosen by Jesus to be the place of his transfiguration.
A cloud came and overshadowed them, and they were afraid as they entered the cloud. And a voice came out of the cloud saying, "This is my Son, my chosen. Listen to him." Mount Tabor, Gate of the Wind. This gate, known as the Gate of the Wind, is part of a fortress wall built by the Muslims in the 13th century around the top of Mount Tabor. Since ancient times, Mount Tabor has been used as a fortified stronghold of great importance, and on its top which is 1,300 yards long and 450 yards wide, there are still many ruins of ancient fortresses and monasteries.
Acre, commanding the approach to the rich plain of Jezreel from the sea, is one of the oldest cities in the world. During its history, it has been occupied by different people. The great history of Acre began with the Crusaders. In 1104, Baldwin I conquered the city, fortified it to secure the seaports, and made it one of the main bulwarks of the Latin kingdom. The Crusaders, unable to reconquer Jerusalem, made Acre the capital of their kingdom. In 1291, Sultan Malik al-Ashraf besieged Acre with 200,000 soldiers, captured it, and put an end to the Latin kingdom, which had lasted for 200 years, 1099 to 1291. In 1775, Acre was rebuilt by Ahmed al-Jazar, nicknamed the Butcher on account of his cruelty. In 1799, Napoleon besieged the city, failed to conquer it, and retreated to Egypt with the greatest setback of his Oriental campaign and the end of his dreams of an Eastern Empire. During the Turkish rule, Acre gradually declined, and it was at last overshadowed by its neighboring city of Haifa.
Crusader and Turkish ruins are the only remains of the long, stirring history of Acre, which has had 17 recorded sieges. The most important remains of the Crusader period is the crypt of St. John, which is believed to be the dining hall of Knights Hospitallers of St. John. From Turkish times remained the mosque and the wall built to guard the city from coastal attacks. The mosque was built by Al-Jazar, and it is considered to be the largest and the most splendid mosque in Israel.
Haifa, a little town of 10,000 in 1905, is now the third largest city in Israel, with a population of 225,000 inhabitants. It possesses the country's main port and the nation's largest and heaviest industries. It is situated in the most beautiful bay of the Mediterranean coast and at the slope of the most charming mountain in Israel, which is Mount Carmel. Mount Carmel is renowned for being the scene of contest between monotheism and paganism. The prophet Elijah confronted the priests of Baal and confounded them when their incantations failed and his own drew fire from heaven. One of the main features of Haifa is its being the world center of the Baha'i faith. The Baha'is, 2 million, believe in the brotherhood of all men, unity of all religions, and a common language.
Caesarea, a small Phoenician town on the Mediterranean coast, was rebuilt in the year 20 BC by Herod the Great. The finest architects and the most skilled engineers of that time spent 12 years working, and they ended with the construction of one of the most beautiful cities of Palestine and the most striking port cities of that period. After Herod's death, Caesarea, because of its splendors, was chosen to be the seat of the Roman procurator, and it served as capital of the Roman government of Palestine for about 500 years. In the 3rd and 4th centuries, Caesarea was a center of Christian learning. In the 12th century, Caesarea was captured and fortified by the Crusaders. In 1291, the city was destroyed by Bibars. It was then abandoned and gradually buried by the sand dunes.
Caesarea, captured by the Crusaders in 1101, was taken by the Muslims under Saladin, and again it was recaptured by the Crusaders. In 1251, the city was fortified by Louis IX of France, who built the impregnable fortifications around the city. The fortifications, as seen in this slide, comprised a wall which surrounded the city on its 3 landward sides. The wall was protected by a moat of 30 feet wide and a sloping embankment rising 30 to 45 feet above the base of the moat.
It was only in 1956 that archaeologists began excavating Caesarea. Very important remains of the splendors of that city have been unearthed. One of the most interesting remains was the historic discovery of a stone inscribed with the name of Pontius Pilate, the procurator who condemned Jesus to death. This was the first archaeological evidence of the famous Pontius Pilate who lived in Caesarea, and from here he went to Jerusalem to attend the Passover, during which he condemned Jesus to the cross.
The Roman theatre on the seashore south of the Crusader Wall was cleared in 1961. It is in great part restored and used for concerts.
Tel Aviv, or Hill of Spring, founded in 1901 on desolate sand dunes, is now the largest city of Israel with a population of 400,000. It is the first city in the world to be built, populated and administered entirely by Jews. It is the commercial, industrial and cultural center of Israel. Jaffa is immediately south of Tel Aviv and has a population of 60,000. Contrary to Tel Aviv, Jaffa has a recorded history of 3,600 years. Since the very ancient times, it has been an important seaport to the country and the gateway to Jerusalem. At Jaffa, St. Peter raised Tabitha to life. Here, St. Peter had the vision in which God asked him to gather into the bosom of the church also the Gentiles. This program was produced by Sami Awad.